Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Baker. This is the third lesson in my seventh unit for environmental science. So, we're going to continue talking about land use and growing food and using it to feed the globe, not just the local populations. And so, today we're going to talk about how modern and traditional techniques are different and some of the hallmarks of each of them. And then we're going to talk mainly about malnutrition and its causes and some of the problems that happens therein. All right, so traditional agriculture usually focuses on plants that are native to the area. So they're only going to use plants that naturally grow in that location. And they're going to do that through plowing by hand or by using animals for their labor. It takes a lot of man hours, a lot of work, and provides lower crop yields, but it does have less impact on the environment. While modern practices are going to have a focus on higher nutritional value, so we're getting more calories out and more nutrients out of the food, and getting higher crop yields. So more produce being produced and more nutrients in the produce. Right? It does usually require more technology through either irrigation or through the actual planting and maintenance of the fields. It has a higher crop yield, so we're getting more product out of it. And it is, because of all that reliance on technology, all of the use of fossil fuels, the higher amount of water being used, the higher amount of pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides, as well as fertilizer being used, it usually has a higher impact on the environment as well. And that's a negative impact, obviously. So the four types of agriculture that we're going to talk about are pastoralism, shifting cultivation, subsistence farming, and intensive farming. We're also going to mention something called extensive farming, but if you remember that extensive is the opposite of intensive, you're probably okay, for my class at least. So pastoralism, it focuses on using pastors or pastures, right? So you're either stationary and using established pastures that are always in the same place, the grass, weed, brush always grows back, or they're nomadic, and they're traveling from place to place in search of those pastures and food and water, right? So the different people groups are going to be using these differently, and it is widely reliant on the land itself and the environment. Shifting cultivation only works when there is enough growth naturally to sustain a cycle of letting land between crops go fallow. So that means go back to growing naturally. So they'll take a regular field that we would think of, and then they would stop growing anything on it. And a secondary forest, remember back when we talked about primary versus secondary resolutions. So we're going to have a secondary forest growth there, and it's going to grow and work to fix nitrogen and carbon, and then that will be cut down and turned back into a field. And it's going to be this long cycle, right? This doesn't happen very widespread, but it's something that does happen, so I wanted to mention it. One of the places it does happen is India, in the northern half of the subcontinent. Subsistence farming is sometimes called truck farming, where only enough food is grown to feed the family or to feed local needs. It never generally leaves the community it's grown in, so that food is being used close to the source that it's grown. And so we're looking at smaller plots of land, and in general, we're also looking at foods that would normally grow in that area, though sometimes, especially in our modern era, that isn't always the case. They are using some that have been brought in or introduced. And then intensive farming is what mostly is practiced here in America, widespread. It is a maximization of crop yields. So we're looking to do everything and anything possible to get as much product out of the ground as possible. So it uses large amount of water, large amount of fertilizers, which put nutrients into the soil, and pesticides that kill the insects that might eat the product, right? And it requires modern equipment to do all of that. So tractors, combines, plows, etc. Right? So lots of technology. It does have less labor in general, but that's because technology is doing work for us. We're harnessing machines to do the labor instead of doing it by hand, or requiring an animal to do that. One of the hallmarks of intensive farming is that it has a big impact on the environment. Extensive farming is the opposite of this, and we're going to talk more about that a little bit later in the unit. All right. As we think about feeding the actual globe and not just the local port, it is important to think about where food comes from on a global scale. On the side with this colorful graph here, we have it's that side, right? So we have a graph of the top 10 food importers. So these are countries that mainly rely on or have a portion of their foods being imported, brought into the country from outside sources. And on the other side of the slide here, we have a top 10 exporters. So these are countries that are producing enough food that they can sell it to other countries, right? So we have this and this kind of imbalance because some countries are able to grow more than enough. Some countries are not able to grow enough to feed their own populations. And this can turn into an economic situation that leads to a political situation, something called food power. We're just talking about this as a thing that happens. We're not going very in-depth on it, all right? Our bigger concern is about food insecurity, which is just the problem of not being able to get enough nutritious food. So you might be able to get enough food that has enough calories, but not enough nutrients, so not enough vitamins and minerals to be healthy. You may also just not be able to get enough food, period. So you might be in a caloric deficit, not getting enough calories. Right? So we have two main stages of this: malnutrition and chronic malnutrition. Chronic malnutrition comes from being malnourished over a long period of time. Globally, about half of all children deaths, which is 5 years and younger, are from chronic malnutrition, not getting enough good food. Right? The three causes that I want you to know if you're in my class are that they're due to inappropriate dietary choices, so picking food that's not healthy over food that is healthy, having a low income because it's harder to buy healthy food than it is to buy unhealthy food, or difficulty obtaining food at all, right? So those are the three I want you to know. The food insecurity is the inability to get enough nutritious food. So food security would be the ability to get nutritious food and enough to be healthy. Right? So we've talked a little bit about the differences between modern and traditional agricultural techniques. We've talked about a few different traditional agricultural techniques that are still being practiced across the globe, as well as some more modern techniques with intensive farming. We're going to continue delving further into this week in my class. So as always, keep asking questions and keep learning. Have a good one.